So, Skip, you create this idea of transformation and pilgrimage, but how exactly do you make that happen?
Well, let's start with the conceptualization of pilgrimage. Anybody who's been in youth ministry or any form of ministry for a while, you do your best that you're crafting sermons, teaching events, fellowship events, service events, caring for folks pastorally, and there's nobody who's been in ministry who sometimes doesn't wonder, am I seeing change? Is the grace of God being manifested? Are folks' lives moving more from attention to self to the love of God and neighbor? And I had a terrific colleague in seminary who knew an awful lot about change. He had this extraordinary resume where he had been a Green Beret fighting in Vietnam, had re-upped as a Navy SEAL fighting in Vietnam, had ended up after the war in a Shaolin Buddhist monastery in China, came back to go back into service of his country fighting with the Shiite Mujahideen in Afghanistan when they were in conflict with the Soviets. So I asked him, I said, Shannon, you know an awful lot about transformation. What do we know? What have you learned? And he said, you know, actually we know how to do transformation when it matters to us. When it's a matter of life and death, we know how to do this. Think about what happens in the Army, the Green Berets, Navy SEALs, Navy, et cetera. Think about what happens at a medical school, law school, business school, where we are really intent on changing orientations of mind and heart. We know what to do. We take people away from their home, away from their comfort zone, put them in a challenging environment, maybe a disruptive environment, maybe a liminal environment, which opens them up vulnerably to change. And then we surround them with practices, ethos, values, peers, all on the same path and trail to the goal of the kind of behaviors and mindsets we want. They engage them, they're trained, they're transformed, and then they're reintegrated as communities as soldiers in their units, Navy SEALs in their units, lawyers in their firms, doctors in their hospitals, et cetera. We know how to do this when it really matters to us. And of course, when you hear that dynamic, a person of faith, really almost any faith knows, I've recognized this, we call this a pilgrimage, right? The pilgrim leaves home with an intention to be transformed, to move closer to the pilgrimage destination, but spiritually closer to God. They engage other people along the way in a liminal, disruptive way, but engaging in the practices of shared storytelling, prayers, devotionals, readings, etc. They approach the ultimate destination. They engage the holy community that's there, or the holy relic, or the sense of spirituality that the place is resonant with. They are transformed by the experience. They reflect on what they've experienced, and they go home, and then they're reintegrated into their community, hopefully transformed by the experience. If we begin to think of mission trips so more along the lines of pilgrimages instead of saintly, empowered first world folks who are saving the rest of the world, I think we will be both better present and able to love the people we partner with, and we will be more open to the gifts that God and they have to give us. There's a writer that has done some really good work on this named Trevor Hudson, who's written a book, A Mile in My Shoes, which is about the mission trips that he stages, mission trips of hope and pain in South Africa. And he has a lovely rubric. The rubric is, we are to go as pilgrims rather than as tourists, as receivers rather than as givers, as listeners rather than as talkers, as learners rather than as teachers. I think that creates the right mindset of humility and openness of the Pilgrim Road, and the kind of appropriate stance for our youth group to be engaging in when they're on the road, and engaging in these communities from which they have so much to learn and so much grace to experience in their open encounter with them. And when you think about it, they didn't invent this in the Green Beret, and they didn't invent this on the road to Lourdes. This has been part of people of faith going way back. Jesus was a pilgrim. The disciples who followed him were pilgrims. They entered Jerusalem as pilgrims. And we don't start there, right? We actually roll the tape back, and we're going to see Jacob in motion, Moses in motion, Abraham in motion. It is the nature and history of our faith that the people in motion on their way to God have always been open to God's transformation. And I think when we began to frame our mission trips along those lines, we're going to find more transformation.